Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this financial success webinar. This is module 3, and it's the last in the series of threes that's being presented by Terry McCloy. For those of you online, I know a majority of you have dialed in to our previous 2 webinars, so you do know if you have any questions at all, just pop them into the Q&A box in Slido, and Terry will answer those throughout his presentation. So sit back, relax, and I'll hand you over to Terry now.
Oh, great. Thank you, Jenny. So look, welcome everybody. It's up here, I'm talking from Auckland. Up here it's a terrible winter's day, sort of torrential rain and wind and everything else that you can think of. So I hope wherever you are, you've got a better day than we've got up here in Auckland. So my name, as Jenny said, is Terry McCloy. I'm the Managing Director of FuturePath. So FuturePath are the leading and market share leading career transition and leadership and talent coaching business in the country. We work internationally across Asia Pacific, and we have a whole range of workshops, of which financial success is one of them, which we have modularized into 3 modules for you so that we can present it to you in a seminar. So a little bit of background about myself. I founded FuturePath 30 years ago in Wellington. And over that time, as I say, we have grown to be where we are today. We've won 2 international awards, one for our customer service and another one for our leadership in terms of the content of both the workshops and the coaching programs that we have. So I hope that you enjoy the workbook that you've got. If you haven't got a workbook, please check with Jenny, because everybody should have a copy of the workbook. We've built the workbook so the workbook is going to be an interactive tool that you can take away and use. So today I will just reference the pages in the workbook. We will talk in general terms about what they cover. What is important is to take it away, what we talk about today. Take notes. Take notes of what things you think are important to you. Take them away, work on them in your spare time. Use the workbook as an interactive, well, we like to call it, it's like a toolbox. So it's something that you can take away in the weekend and work through with yourself. If you are in a relationship and you do have a partner, it may be something that you would want to share with that partner at a later time. And I'll repeat what I said in the last seminar. There's a really good tool, and I'll talk about it in a moment, a really good active listening tool that if you're sharing it with somebody, this is a good way to share it. But before we start, and before I talk about that, what I'd like to do is refer to page 3 in the workbook. Page 3 is our disclaimer. And under that disclaimer, we want to make it very clear that we are not a financial advisor service. We are not registered under the Financial Advisors Act of 2008. And this advice is not personalized financial advice. Now, that may sound very formal, and it is, because you know, legally in New Zealand, if you are going to give financial advice, you need to be a registered financial advisor. What we're sharing with you today is just good common sense information. It's information for you to take away and make decisions for yourselves. We would highly recommend that you go to your accountant or to your financial advisor or your financial planner. And if you don't have any of those, we would suggest that if you're very serious about financial success in the future, that you find an accountant, a financial advisor, or a financial planner. And if you remember in our last seminar, last week, we talked about how you go about finding a financial advisor. And I think that's really good because it helps you plan, it challenges you. It's a bit like going to the gym. You know, you could go to the gym, and you often see people, for those people who go to the gym, you'll see people come in, they'll do the same exercises every day. They're not pushing themselves, they're not stretching themselves, they're not challenging themselves, they're not working other muscles. And I like to think of the financial advisor as a bit like a gym personal trainer, where they say, look, you know, you've done your aerobics, you've done your weights, now we want to do stretching, we want to get flexibility up. So it challenges you and pushes you into spaces that you may not have gone to before. So again, please realize that this is not financial advice. This is just information for you to act upon with your financial advisor. I love the quote at the bottom of page 3. It says, show me where you spend your money and I will tell you what your priorities are. And I think that's a really, really powerful message. We've talked about it in the other 2 seminars. And we talked about it last time about the types of saving thinking that people have. Like, you've met people who earn good money and save good money, but they don't want to spend anything. So they spend their whole lives complaining probably about other people. And I know people who are sometimes quite miserable because they're saving money. And that's because that's their choice. But I've always had a philosophy, and as I said to you in the previous seminar, it's around your relationship with money that's very important, and examine that. Because I am very security conscious. So to me, having adequate income or having adequate savings is really very, very, very important. But then again, I made a decision years ago. I don't want to be a prisoner to it. I want to be able to do the things I choose to. And sometimes I don't, because you look at the security thing. But I don't want to be one of those people who look back on their life and go, I didn't do certain things because I was so obsessed with saving money that is sitting in the bank now, and that will be passed on to my inheritors. So I think, one of the key things I think is working out what works for you. And we covered that in the first seminar on page 5. And I'll just quickly do a recap. Your future is created by what you do today. It's like anything in life. Every journey, I think it was Confucius or somebody said, every journey starts with a step. So make those steps, identify what those steps are. We talked quite a bit in the previous seminars about true north. Where is your true north? And I like that description because life blows us off course. So at times you could be heading northwest or northeast. Sometimes you could even be heading south. But if you know where your true north is, what it is you want to achieve in life, what it is you want to achieve in terms of financial success, what is important to you and your whānau, identify that, and that becomes your true north. I see so many times when we're coaching people, they think that life is going to be a straight line once you make a plan. I make a plan, I'm going to go in a straight line. Well, that's not the case, as you know, from talking to people, a month after New Year's Day, because the amount of people who make resolutions on New Year's Day that by a month later are still not being done is quite phenomenal. I know one business that really survives on basically the amount of people who register with it. It's a gym. They say their profitability comes in the first 2 months of the year when people sign up for 3 or 4 months of gym but never turn up. One of the things we talked about that's very, very important, I think, is looking at building an emergency fund. If you turn to page 6, there's an emergency fund concept of 3 to 6 months of your non-discretionary spending. It's a great option for you to look at. And it's a great option. We talk about it in our Life Architects workshop, where people are looking at what they want to do for the next 30 years, and it's a powerful workshop. And what we say is that, often these people are in their 50s. They say, gosh, my medical insurance is high. And we say to them, well, perhaps if you have an emergency fund for your doctor's visits and some of the smaller medical, you can use the emergency fund for that, and then change your policy so you actually have a policy that is more tailored around the needs you might need, for example, such as surgery and other things. And that enables you to drop your premium slightly, and you're using your emergency fund. Page 7, plan to succeed. Very important. I mean, we all know that what gets measured gets done. For those of you who are in business, what gets measured gets done. For those of you who have working to deadlines, whatever the deadlines may be, you know that when you start getting closer to the deadline, there is an emergency, or there is a focus, or there is a real focus from yourself on, I need to get this done because I have a deadline. So that is why I think planning to succeed is quite important, because you're sitting there and you're looking and saying, I need to do this, or I should be trying to do this, or I should be doing more of this, or I should be doing less of that. And then we talked about budgeting, if you remember, in our first seminar, around the fact that budgeting is, again, a simple measure to identify what's coming in and what's going out. But the important thing in what's going out is challenging yourself on some of those going out items. So, for example, often we find people have never challenged their power suppliers. They've never challenged their mobile phone supplier. They've never looked at themselves and said, gosh, what are the direct debits I've got going? One of the most common ones we see when we run workshops is people going, gosh, I've got life insurance, but I took it out to cover my whānau in the case something happened to me when I took out a mortgage on the house. And we've really reduced that mortgage significantly. Do I need that amount of cover? And they've never thought about it because the premiums are being paid as a direct credit out of their account. So challenge your expenditure and look at other options, because you'll be very surprised at what you will be able to identify and reduce. We talked in the last seminar last week about as financial advisors, and I think they're really good because they're like a coach. They're there to challenge you. They're there to identify opportunities for you. They're there to help you with your planning. They're there to help you focus. And I gave the example last week of my mum a number of years ago. She didn't have very much. And my brother and sister went and got a financial advisor. And I was surprised, about 10 years later when she passed, how much money that had been built up simply by them using the financial advisor. And it was wise, sound investment where they were getting solid returns. And again, with financial advisors, generally, you'll be able to meet with them. You'll be able to check whether they're compatible with you, whether they suit you. Ask them around what their risk appetite is, because risk appetite is very important, because that needs to relate back to you. So you don't want to be with a financial advisor, as I said last week, is big on Bolivian gold futures. I don't know whether there's such a thing, but imagine, it's going to pay 35%. Well, probably if you want to put money into that, you need to be prepared to lose it. That's the risk appetite. Whereas for some people, they wouldn't do that. I certainly wouldn't do that. So again, we talked about on pages 12 and 13 last week, your profile, and your profile as a financial personality type is probably a mixture of the 5 that we've got listed there. You're probably not exactly one. The most important thing, however, is if you are in a relationship and you have a partner and their profile is exactly the opposite of yourself, you need to have a lot of conversations around what is important, what your goals are, what your true north are for yourselves individually and as a relationship, as a partnership, and be able to reach compromise. So I promised you at the beginning, I'd tell you a really good active listening tip. And this is a really good one if you are going to address any kind of thorny issue with anybody, really, but particularly when you're addressing something like money, which does tend to be a little more delicate than perhaps some other conversations. What you do, it's an active listening technique called listen with love. So what you do is you say to the other person, I'm setting my phone on 4 minutes, my stopwatch on my phone for 4 minutes. I'm going to talk for 4 minutes. And at the end of that 4 minutes, I will stop talking and you can talk for 4 minutes as well. But in those 4 minutes, neither party interrupts the other. And at the end of the 8 minutes, you both sit down with a cup of tea or a glass of wine or whatever it is that you like, and you have a conversation about what was said by both parties in that 4 minutes of uninterrupted conversation. Why it's powerful is because it gives you the chance to expand on an idea without somebody interrupting you, derailing it, and taking you off down a side street. It's a very powerful active listening tool. And then we've got, some of the suggestions for you on pages 14, 16, through to 17, right through to 18, of how you can actually manage budgets, the items you could put in your budget, set up your spreadsheets, or however you want to do it, whether it's on an app or a spreadsheet that you want to use on your computer. And then we talked about on page 19, some of the realistic savings plans that you can have. So for example, you may set up a series of different accounts, and each week or each fortnight or each month, you put a certain amount of money into those accounts to make sure that you've got them covered. I mean, one of the things we do in our business is that we do have an automatic payment at every month goes into a tax account. So we estimate, our accountants estimate at the beginning of the year, what our tax liability generally is, and that's put away every month. So we have to manage with what's left. And it's been a really good tool for us, because we're not sort of getting to tax time and going, oh my goodness, we have this tax bill and we don't have quite the amount of money we need to pay the tax. So let's look at today, what we want to focus on today. So on page 20, we're going to look at how you can control your debt. And I would imagine that most people have debt, maybe not everybody, but most people have debt. So one of the debt mistakes, the 8 debt mistakes we have here on page 20, the first one is to ignore it. You know, it's like a friend of mine says, he says, when he's dealing with anything he doesn't like, he says, I carry a box of sand with me. And when I have something I don't want to hear or know about, I put the box down and put my head in the sand. Hasn't worked too well for him. And again, if you tend to ignore debt, it simply won't work for you as well. Only making minimum payments. Well, sometimes that's all you can make. But my suggestion is you look at actually reducing debt by not making more than minimum payments. And one of the things that we will talk about is, you know, making a list, and we talked about that before, making a list of the debt that we have and also the interest rates beside it. So you'll see that, for example, over in number 7, one of the things is to reduce credit card debt. Credit card debt is probably your most expensive debt. And it's very easy to slip into the habit of just making minimum payments on a credit card and then carrying them over, but you're paying really high interest. The next high interest rate would probably be overdraft if you're using overdraft. And then we go back to your various home loans or commercial loans that you may have. So the suggestion is don't ignore it. Don't put it out of sight. One of the key things I learned years ago in business, you need to deal with reality. It may not be pleasant, but dealing with reality gives you control over what is happening in your life. So ignoring it is actually saying, I want to live in no control. And no control equals stress. And probably around debt is going to equal a real high level of stress at some stage in the future. So when you're doing your financial plan, try and identify how you can actually repay those high interest debts and get more than making minimum repayments. Try and reduce principal if you can, because by reducing principal, you're also reducing your outgoings. One of the other things I think that's interesting is item number 3. It's addressing why you have the debt in the first place. So like if you bought a house, you know why. But if it's sitting on your credit card, for example, you might go, well, why am I spending all this money on the credit card? Why do I need to spend this? And I mentioned last time, I have a policy of 3 whys. So you ask, why do I do it? Why am I doing it? And what could I do next? Or why could I not look at alternatives to what I'm doing, which may be not to spend anything? So I think it's challenging yourself and being prepared to look at the core drivers of why debt is there. Not making reducing debt a priority. And I know people who say, well, if I keep trying to reduce principal, I'm going to reduce my lifestyle and changing that. And that is a personal decision that you need to make. Nobody can make that for you. But I think, one of the things is to look at your financial plan in the longer term. And my experience and my guessing is that when you start looking at it in a longer term framework, you'll actually start saying there's a balance between having a good life now and actually making it a priority to reduce debt. Certainly as you age, you're looking to actually have financial security as much as you are looking to have the ability to spend. So there's a balance. And surprisingly, when you look at it today, one of the interesting things that I find when we run our Life Architects workshop, one of the questions we ask people is, how long do you think you will live? And people generally, guess what they say? They say, 70 to 80. Now, the interesting thing is that people today are they're going to live close to 90. Like the average life expectancy in New Zealand is 86 years for a female, 84 years for a male. And that's increasing, it's growing. And certainly if you get to 65, you'll probably live through to 95. your life expectancy goes up. It's a statistical adjustment. So I've come across people who said to me, well, if I'm going to live to 90, what will I live on? Because I don't have the savings for it. So that's why I say, look at your long-term financial planning. This is a choice thing for you. You make those choices for you. No matter what anybody tells you, whether it be a financial advisor or anybody else, these are your choices. Making it a goal. And we're going to talk later today about goal setting around SMART goals. So you know that old cliche, what is measured gets done. What is measured gets done. Same as deadlines. Deadlines are great for creativity because you look at the deadline and think, I've got to get that report done. I've got to get this done. So you actually focus on doing it. So make debt reduction if you can, if you're comfortable with it, one of your priorities. That you're saying, okay, if I got some disposable income here, should we go and have a weekend away at a spa, or should we actually put that towards reducing debt? Again, choice. Creating a weekly budget enables you to see what's coming in and what's going out, and enables you to challenge some of the expenditure. It also gives you the chance to look at it and say, how do I maximize my income? We've touched on credit cards or debit cards. One of the ways that you can reduce credit cards is stop using them. And that's not practical often in our lives, but debit cards are quite good as well because you load the debit card up and when that's gone, it's gone. So it's a much more controlled way of actually managing your spending. And one of the things I think we need to look at is old spending habits. Like you watch people when they go to the supermarket and you look at supermarket trolleys and you think, gosh, you know, some people, they have stuff in there that they will always probably get every single time they go. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but that is becoming a habit. Like it's probably their habit of what they put in and buy when they go to the supermarket. Often when you challenge, why are you doing that? Why do you need that? Why can't you have something else? People go, oh, because I've always done it that way. And I think I mentioned last time, we put a project in 3 years ago into the business. So in January, 3 years ago, we put a project into the business, which was the 3 whys. So before any decision was made in Future Path, you had to answer 3 why questions. Why are we doing this? Or why are we ordering that? Why do we need it? And why can't we do something else or not do it? By March, we had reduced 36% of what we were doing. 36% of what we were doing was eliminated. Why? Because we were just doing habitual stuff, the same old habits we had always done before. So to finish up this section, there's a great quote at the bottom I love from that famous guy, Warren Buffett. The chains of habit are too light to be felt until they're too heavy to be broken. And that's true because people say, but I can't change that. I need that. That's important. And you go, but why? And again, it comes back to choice. It's choice. Is financial planning and success more important than, you know, consumption right now, or what? And if it is that choice you make, that's good because that's your choice. But at least you're making the choice deliberately, not involuntarily, just because it's a habit. Smart ways to deal with that. And we've talked about the first one here is make a list of your debts with the interest rate on each. And, you know, that's quite surprising when you do it. I've done this a number of times and you think, wow, gosh, that interest rate's high. I need to change what we're doing in terms of repayment to get that interest rate down. Sometimes if you've got a number of loans, it's also worthwhile to sit and talk with your bank manager, particularly if interest rates are tracking down and you've got higher interest rates, and it's looking at ways to perhaps consolidate some of what you have. It's also, can you actually have them as residential mortgages versus commercial commercial loans versus home loans. So it's looking at the options that you can get, and it's worthwhile sitting down periodically with your banker to have a discussion about that. And again, it's identify those debts with the highest interest rate and focused on repaying them, as we talked about a little bit earlier. Now, one of the things that we've got over here is using active listening techniques for talking with your partner, if applicable. So we don't want to make assumptions, but many people are in relationships. Research has shown that one of the biggest flashpoints in relationships, it's up there in the top 3, is money. Money is one of those things that when people are in relationships, it is a subject that you can talk about openly or not, or it can be a subject that can be quite delicate and quite sensitive, because somebody says to you, but why did you spend that? We don't need that. And you go, but I like it. Again, it almost feels at times as being judgmental. So identify, if you are in a relationship with someone else, identify your financial personality types, as we've got, and we covered as we got previously, and as we covered in the seminar last week. Identify them. Then use the listen with love technique, the active listening technique, where you can sit and spend 4 minutes, or perhaps 5 if you want, without the other person talking. And so what happens, you might say, I'm giving an example here, you might say, I'm a bit worried about our long-term finances, and you don't want somebody interrupting and going, but you shouldn't bought such and such last week if you're worried about the long-term finances. And immediately the conversation goes off track. And we've probably all been in situations where that may have happened to us. But by talking for 4 minutes without an interruption, you're able to say, and I do realize that I probably shouldn't have bought that stuff last week. And I do realize I've got a weakness in that particular area. So the person listening to you is now going, that's good. I can actually see the logical thinking pattern here, which means they don't interrupt, but they actually got an understanding of where you're coming from and what is important to you. Vice versa is the same. And then it's about sitting down and saying, okay, depending on your age level, what do we want to do? What are we going to do? Are we going to retire? Now, a lot of people have been conditioned that they retire at 65. And yet, if you're going to live to 80, or perhaps into 90, then retiring at 65 is really retiring very young. And so people go, oh, well, maybe I need to work on a lot longer. So those are discussions I can promise you that a lot of Kiwis do not have. And I've seen this when we run our Life Architects workshops. People are going, I've never thought about it like that. Have you had the discussion? No, I've never had the discussion. So I think the key thing around having conversations with somebody you have as a partner is about, how do you feel about debt, for example? How do you feel about credit card or debit card debt? What are things that you value on spending versus travel and clothing? And again, it's one of those personal things that's important to some people and not important to others. You also have different principles. Do we want to have joint accounts? Do we want to have a separate account? If we have separate accounts, what are the rules that we're going to use to work around them? Because I can tell you from experience, I have a friend who's just gone through a rather difficult situation in their relationship because they never talked about money. And then they got into trouble and found out that the husband of this particular friend of mine had actually ran up a whole lot of debt, like $200,000 or $300,000 worth of debt. And the first that she realized it was when the finance company called her. So that really impacted badly on the relationship because it was a breach of trust now. And so I think it's very important to have those conversations and establish boundaries, parameters, or rules, whatever suits you and whatever works for you. We expect different things. Like if you're an only child, and I have a friend who's an only child, and they expect their parents to bail them out if they have a problem. Now, I come from a family of 8. And the idea that when I was younger, if I went to my parents and said to my parents, can you bail me out? There was no way they'd be doing that. They say, you got yourself into this mess, you get yourself out of it. They would give me support. And I suppose if the rubber really hit the road, they would bail me out, but I wouldn't expect it. And it would be an aberration. And so I've always been very self-sufficient, which is what I said to you earlier about why I have a bit of a focus on security. So having said that, if you were married in a relationship, married or engaged in a relationship or in a partnership of any sort, and one person had that perspective, the other person had that perspective, You need to actually find where the meeting is in the middle, or understand where the people are coming from. And again, it's having those discussions that we don't do sometimes. If somebody borrows money within the family, do we charge interest? I was sitting down with one of my family members recently, and I had a family member call me and say to me, can I borrow money from you because we are looking to buy a house? And I said to this person, no, I'm sorry, I don't have that amount of money to lend to you at the moment. And I know what this person is. This person likes to really live way beyond their means. And I knew it would cause a lot of conflict and a lot of aggravation. So they went to another one of my family members and borrowed the money. And that family member was talking to me recently and saying how upset they were because they didn't feel they were treated with respect. 6 months after they lent this person the money to buy this house, they went to Fiji for a week and a half on holiday. And I said, how did you feel about that? And they said, I was incandescent. So part of it is about being very clear and upfront about charging interest to family, lending money to family, and being very comfortable if you're in a relationship that you both agree on the same thing. And we have different capabilities around money. So at the bottom on page 23, use the active listening techniques. I would use listen with love, but whatever works for you, it's about understanding where each other comes from, understanding what is important to each other, communicating, and compromising. Now, compromise is a word that sometimes ends up with a negative feel about it, but it's not. I think it's meeting in the middle. It's actually understanding what's important to you and understanding what's important to you and saying, look, while I don't agree with all of that, I'm in these situations, I'm prepared to meet you in the middle on this, or I'm prepared to agree with that. The essence of all of this is a thing called trust. So if you want to work as a team, and a lot of people say I want to work as a team, there's only one thing that drives it, and it's trust. The example I gave to you about the friend whose husband had gone off and ran up $300,000 worth of debt, their relationship is on the rocks. Not because he actually borrowed that money and didn't tell her, but she just felt there was no trust. And so that moved from a money thing to a trust thing. And no relationship can really survive a breach of trust. So let's talk over on page 24 about the other people that are important in our lives. Often, if we want to manage ourselves financially, it's talking with children. If you have children, it's about being upfront with them around, look, this is what we want to try and achieve as a family in terms of our financial planning. You don't need to go, as we say here, you don't need to go into infinite details. You don't need to have PowerPoint slides of your bank accounts. You don't need to do that. But what you do need is to be able to articulate to them what it is you're trying to achieve, and then understand from them what is important for them in their lives from a financial perspective. And I think that's really critical, because in situations where I've seen parents sit down and have this conversation, the parents have always said to me, I was absolutely surprised at how much the kids were able to come and contribute in their own way. So just perhaps small ways and small things, but the kids said, look, well, we want to be part of this because they're part of the solution, not part of the problem. And so I think that's really, really important, and it's being able to set boundaries. And it's a good training area for kids, because kids are starting to get appreciation of, these are the kind of pressures my parents are working with. These are the kind of things that are important to us as a family. This is what I need to do that, which is, again, helping them build a plan for the future. So it's giving them good structure, good disciplines, and a good understanding of why it's important to look at financial planning. Talking with friends or whānau. Now, I think this is probably a wee bit more difficult, but, you know, I've got a friend and he likes to go to a particular restaurant that I just find to be massively overpriced for what is delivered. And so I say to him, I'm not prepared to go to this particular restaurant. And he's like, but this is my favorite restaurant. I said, well, that's fine. I understand that. But it just doesn't fit within my budget. And it's not only the budget, it's just I think it's overpriced. So I think in your own way, be able to articulate with friends what is important to you. What is important to you from a financial planning perspective? It at times can be a little difficult because you think, I don't want to sort of get offside with them. But I think it's also being proactive as well by saying, here's another alternative. So I always say to him, when we are going out to have lunch, I say to him, well, why don't we go here? And he's like, no, maybe somewhere else. But we always end up with a compromise solution that is generally pretty good. And the reality is we're not going out to eat at the best restaurant we can possibly eat at. We're going out to spend time together, catch up, hear what's happening in his life, hear what's happening in my life. So it's about getting the priorities right. So again, with budgets, it's challenging it in your own way, remanaging it in your own way, and perhaps being able to articulate options in a different way rather than what the habit is or the easy way is. So I think that's a really important aspect that you need to look at. So we come over to levels of listening on page 25, and this is critical. We've talked about active listening. Now, the interesting thing, you look at there, we've got 5 levels of listening. Now, interestingly enough, research has shown that we all have default listening positions. And generally, these default listening positions come from your upbringing, your childhood, your upbringing. So let me give you an example. My default listening position is listening to agree or disagree. Why? Well, I was brought up in a very Irish family. We're 4 generations Kiwi, but pure Irish on both sides for those 4 generations. Now, if you know the Irish pretty well, they do tend to debate, argue, and have agreements and disagreements around various things. So if I was talking to my brother who lives in Canterbury, and I said to him, the Blues are playing well, and he didn't disagree with it, then I would probably be a little worried because, that's not how we express things. So one of the key things with that is around the DNA of agreeing to disagree or not disagree. It is what you've been brought up with. And I remember my ex-wife who came from Trinidad, and Trinidad is lovely. The people in Trinidad are very gentle people. And after the first time she met my family, she goes, why does everybody hate each other? And I go, they don't. She goes, but you're arguing about everything. I said, yeah, but that's how we express our affection and feelings. So that's an explanation of my DNA. But then again, that doesn't work too well if I need to understand what somebody is trying to tell me. So over the years, I've had to practice being able to move up and move down this ladder. So identify where your default position is, and then say, in what other positions do I need to move? So if I was standing in a bar, I would probably be listening to tell my story, or maybe listening to agree or disagree. But if I was sitting down with a person that I needed to understand where they're coming from, like in a coaching conversation, or with a staff member, or talking about finances, I would need to be listening to understand. And so one of the key things here is about being able to identify where your default position is and where you need to move. Now, when I started off on my journey of listening to understand, it was very difficult because guess what? I wanted to keep going back to my default position, which was, no, I don't agree with that, or I do agree with that. And I found when I use listening with love, or I actually sit there and ask open-ended questions so I can listen to understand, I often find that my initial assumption was incorrect, because once I listen to the full conversation, I understand where they're coming from and I understand the difference between it. So if you are talking about finances, focus on the levels of listening and focusing on what you would normally do in these situations, and look to change it so that you're listening to understand. Down the bottom, you've got a little PDF box. My default listening position is X. I need to practice X, which is where I want to move to. And my active listening goal is whatever you may want it to be. So we have a question up here. Terry, do you recommend using a broker for insurance, mortgages, etc.? Maybe depends if independent. Workplaces have various insurances also. So look, I think this is a personal preference. So let's take insurance to begin with. I think if you have a lot of insurances or you have complicated insurances, brokers are very good. But if you just have, say, car insurance and personal household effects insurances, you can probably do those yourself. Now, for example, some insurance companies don't deal with brokers. Like you take state insurance does not deal with brokers to the best of my knowledge. Other organizations will deal with brokers, such as NZI, they will deal with brokers. So I think if your insurances are relatively straightforward, you can probably do them yourself. Check them every year, find out premiums every year, get comparisons every year. If you have insurances such as around, professional liability, public indemnity, more complicated insurances like cyber, if you're running a business and you need cyber insurance, etc., definitely use a broker, because you'll find there's a very, very big variation in rates. And so, I mean, big. Like last year, we shifted our brokers and we found there was probably a $10,000 difference in quoted premiums. So that's big. So mortgages, again, it's a personal preference. I've used mortgage brokers. I've found them to be very, very, very good. Why are they very good? Because let's imagine to get a mortgage approved, I was told by a banker it has to pass through 9 approvals or maybe 10 approvals. But it's a convoluted process within a bank to get a mortgage approved, especially in the current market. The mortgage broker does sort of 4 or 5 of these steps already. So they're presenting the bank with the first 4 or 5 steps already done. So the risk has been reduced. That's how I understand it. But again, it's a personal preference. And for you to have a look at that as well. So I hope that answers that question. If there's any further questions on that, please don't hesitate to ask. So one of the questions we often get is on page 26, how do I understand through listening? Well, there's a number of things. Firstly, you can use that tool I mentioned, Listen with Love. Another one is to use open-ended questions. So closed questions are almost presuming the answer. So if I said to you, you're not happy about this, are you? And you have to answer yes or no, but I'm not getting any information around whether you are happy or not happy. If I said to you, how do you feel about this? Now you're able to come back and say, I don't feel 100% comfortable. Why aren't you 100% comfortable? So those are open-ended questions that are eliciting information back to you. One of the key things to make people feel very comfortable, for example, if you said, I don't feel very comfortable, and I go, can you tell me why you don't feel very comfortable? And I said, because of so-and-so. And I go, okay, I understand now. So what you're saying to me is you don't feel comfortable because of this, this, and this. And they go, absolutely. You've now established a rapport. Or you acknowledge feelings. If somebody says, I don't understand why you keep spending money on such and such, you can say, I can see how you feel that. And can I explain to you why? So acknowledging feelings is a good way to get people to feel they're not being put in a situation where they're being judged. And asking clarifying questions to make sure you understand. So I hear what you're saying. This is what you said to me, but I'm not sure that I completely understand what's important to you. Can you help me see what it is that's important to you or why that's important to you? So listen with the intent to understand. Do not listen with the intent to reply. Be curious and ask open-ended questions. And I think that is the key thing to being able to understand others, whether they be your partner, whether they be a person that you work with, if you're in a partnership in a business sense. It could be somebody that you might be in a relationship. It could be kids, or it could be anybody. But it's also an excellent tool to develop just generally when you're dealing with people, because you are now getting yourself into the habit of finding out what they really think. And that gives you a better opportunity to relate to them in a way that has value. So one of the key things about setting goals, and we're going to talk a little about this on page 27 and 28. So we got financial goals. Set goals that motivate you. Nobody has ever set a goal and probably achieved it easily if they're not motivated around it. And motivation can take many forms. It's about understanding why it's important, or painting a picture of what it looks like when it's achieved. So humans respond to that. Humans respond to the vision of what it would look like if it's achieved. Set the goals in writing. If they're sitting in your head, you probably will not achieve them as easily as if you put them in writing and wrote down why you want to achieve it, what it looks like when it's achieved, write down the measurements that you will have, and write down the date it will be achieved by. Define an action plan. Get yourself an action plan of this is what's going to happen to get these goals achieved. Now, we run a program called Vision to Action, which we run for businesses. And it's a brilliant program. It beats anything that there is out there in strategic planning. And organizations have used it, have just seen transformational results. Why? Because there is a secret. We do not look at more than 5 goals. And under those 5 goals, we never look at more than 5 sub-goals. Why? Well, the human brain at a conscious level can hold 2 things in the brain at once. You can listen to me today, and you can probably be working out what you're going to have for dinner. The subconscious brain can hold a maximum of 7, but more typically 5. But once you go over that, we get a thing called stress, because the brain goes, this is too much to handle at a subconscious level, and just goes, stress. And the unconscious brain is unlimited. So you'll wake up at 3 in the morning and go, that was that person's name I couldn't remember last night. What happens when people do goals? They write down 10 or 20 goals. You won't succeed that easily with 20 goals. Write down 5. And when those 5 are achieved, write down 5 more. And when they're achieved, write down 5 more, because those 5 will sit in your subconscious. They will be living, breathing goals that you can think about day by day. And then review and reflect. Review and reflect. So keep coming back to them every week. I would come back to goals every week and look at them. And you may not be doing anything particular about them every week, but you're just looking at them. And again, it's getting it into that subconscious. And what happens in our subconscious is we start making some of those things absolutely happen. Now, a good tool to do this is on page 28, which is SMART goal setting. Many of you probably use SMART goal setting or something similar. But goals that are clearly described and defined so you know what they are, and precise amounts and results, which is the measurable and attainable, realistic, achievable, and stretching. You often see goals written by people that you think they're never going to happen, and I was talking to a personal trainer a while back, and he said people come in and they think they're going to lose 20 kilos in sort of a few weeks by coming to the gym sort of a couple of times a week. He said, not going to happen. So that's an unachievable. Set yourself goals, and I tend to want to set smaller goals that you can actually achieve, that you create your own momentum with. Again, as I said, in the Vision to Action program that we run, we get them clearly described so that you clearly understand what the goal is. If you're working in groups, what often happens in groups is that people all have different perceptions of what the goal is. So let's imagine you had 5 people sitting in a room and you said, define customer service to me. I guarantee those 5 people would have 5 different definitions of customer service. And they would go out and with good intent, try to make them happen. But instead of going like this, they would all be going like that. So that's why clarity of definition of what the goal achieved looks like is important. And make sure that the goal is relevant, relevant to your life and career decisions, and then set dates by which it will be achieved. I remember many years ago sitting in a meeting. There was a new chief executive. He'd sat down, he'd done the Vision to Action, where we'd set down clearly defined goals, and everybody had taken responsibility, and people had put their hand up and said, I'll be responsible for that by this date. And he looked around the room and he said, well, I've done all of mine. It was 6 months later. I've done all of mine. How about you? And one person said, well, we had this on, we had that on, we had this on, we had that on. And he said, stop. He said, you made me a promise which you've broken. And this person looked at him and he said, can you tell me why you should be in your job if you make promises you break? And this person was smart enough and said, no, I quite agree with you. He said, all right, you've got 3 months to make them happen. 3 months later, they're all done. This organization went from here to here in a period of 2 years simply because they focused on small goals and nailing them continuously, but everybody taking ownership for what they'd promised around delivery by dates. So dates are important because I think they enable us to focus on what is important, and it gives us a target. And guess what? Humans love targets. So if you want to change anything in your life or in your financial way of thinking, page 29 gives us a very powerful tool to do it. It's called the 30-day challenge. So in a 30-day challenge, it's basically, it takes 30 days to change a habit. And two quite famous organizations made international businesses using the basis of the 30-day challenge. They were Weight Watchers and Jenny Craig. They just repackaged it into weigh-ins and various other things. But in essence, they were working on the psychological principle of the 30-day challenge around how we reprogram our brains. So if you want to change something, let's imagine you want to develop active listening skills. You might write down, my 30-day goal is to develop active listening skills. What will I achieve? I will achieve understanding. I will learn how to ask open-ended questions, and I will move from my default of listening to agree or disagree to listening to understand. Completion date, 30 days. Now, what makes this successful is that before you go to sleep each night, you stop and you go, did I ask open-ended questions today? Did I move from my default listening to understand? And if the answer to any one of those questions is, oh, I didn't quite listen, or I did ask a closed question today, you go back and start at 0 again. So the idea is, until you can get 30 days, repeat 30 days in a line where you haven't gone back to 0, you will have a new habit. Now, I promise you, I've known people get to their 7th iteration on it, and they're sitting at 20 days, and they are living and breathing, not going back to 0. And what happens when they get to the end of the 30 days, they have built themselves a new habit, a new way of being conscious about what they do. It's a very powerful tool. We use it a lot in leadership training. It's called a tool called reframing. So it helps you reframe your thinking by challenging yourself to do certain things differently. And often we do things because we don't think about them or we're not conscious. We do it habitually. This stops us being habitual. It says, hang on, I'm going to sit down and talk to Terry. I do not want to listen to agree or disagree. I'm going to practice open-ended questions. You might write them down. You might have them in the front of your mind. And when you ask an open-ended question, you go, wow, that's interesting. But it becomes your new habit. So that wraps us up for the 3 seminars that we've done. If anybody is interested in investing in themselves and one-to-one coaching, please give me an email or give Lisa an email. That's on page 30. One of the key things I think for yourselves is to go back through this workbook, the Financial Success Workbook, and ask yourself some questions around it. If you're in a business relationship or a personal relationship which is affected by finance, maybe give that workbook to those people and say, read it and tell me what you think, or sit down and have a listen with love, or an active listening session, or ask open-ended questions to get listening to understand. It's a journey, and don't be tough on yourself, because, as I said at the beginning, every journey starts with a first step. And again, if we go back to true north, we're going to drift off course at times. That's life. Nothing in life is a straight line. And so the key thing is knowing, I have drifted off course. What is it going to take for me to get back on course again? And so I think that that's really, really very, very important in terms of being able to set yourself goals and achieve them. And, the quote that we have there on page 3 is, something magical happens when you write down your goals. It changes the way you see your situation. And I think it's also magical about people who set goals and achieve them, because when you meet people who do that, they have a different energy and a different focus than people who are often setting goals and don't achieve them, or people who don't set goals and then they're saying, but I'm a victim. You know, we need to own our lives, and we need to own what we do, and we need to be clear about what it is we want to achieve in our lives. So thank you very much. I'm really appreciative of all you being there. Thank you for your comments. A lovely comment just come through. Thanks, Sarah. I really enjoyed the course and your gifts that you shared with us. It's my pleasure. Happy to do it. And I just say go out and make your plans for yourself and then work towards achieving them. So thank you very much. Have a lovely day. Stay dry, stay warm, and stay safe. Cheers.